Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we're going to be doing another mock draft after some great games tonight. Monday night as of this recording. It should be coming out Tuesday with the Giants and the Titans both coming off with some very big wins in the end for them. Their draft stock is going to change a little bit, going to have a little bit of a lower pick, higher pick, however you want to look at it. Their pick is going to be later in the first round. Both teams, I guess, still competing. The Giants have an outside shot. I'm a Giants fan, so Tommy DeVito winning 3 games in a row is big. But for now, let's start off with the Chicago Bears with the first overall pick. And I still think the pick is pretty simple here. I still think it's Caleb Williams. I still think he's the best quarterback in this class. I know there's still some talk about maybe him staying at school. I don't think he's going to. Drake May officially announced that he's going to enter the draft this year. So I think he is quarterback number 2. We'll get that out of the way. And he will go to the New England Patriots here, who I also think still need a quarterback. Both of these teams are in despair right now. I think after this past weekend, some people pointing out that maybe Justin Fields could be an answer long term if they figure things out, but it seems like that's how it's kind of been all year. He goes through some of these phases where he gets a good game in him and then people start talking and then we see the actual Justin Fields after that, but I still think that's their biggest need. And for the Patriots, Bailey Zappe's been okay. He's been good enough. They beat the Steelers, which helps them out, I guess. They didn't lose any draft stock. They're still the number 2 seed, so it boosts morale and their draft stock stays the same. So in the end, I think it's a win-win for them. They really control their destiny for that second overall pick if they continue losing, but we'll see what happens. They're competing against a team like Carolina, who I think is a lot worse than the Patriots, and Arizona, who I think is better than the Patriots, so I wouldn't be surprised if they stay in the second spot and draft Drake May. Now, this spot, it gets interesting. The Arizona Cardinals here at 3, and the question now is Marvin Harrison going to stay at school? There's been some talk about different options for Marvin Harrison. I know he wants to stay. He wants to potentially win the Big Ten championship, and he wants to be able to play in the Big Ten championship, in Indianapolis, where his dad ended up playing in the NFL. But I think if he stays, I just don't really see it going well for him. I don't think it can get worse. I mean, he's the number 1 guy in this draft, depending on who you ask. I think it's really him and Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers is an elite talent, but Marvin Harrison, one of the best wide receiver prospects that we've seen almost ever, especially within the past decade, up there with Jamar Chase, and Jamar Chase has definitely worked out pretty well in the NFL so far. So Marvin Harrison here, I think, is the pick for the Cardinals, though there is some talk about him staying. I don't think he will. I just don't really see any need for him to. I know he wants to win that Big Ten championship, but hypothetically, you go in here and you go to the Cardinals, which they have a good quarterback in Kyler Murray. I still think you can believe in Kyler Murray and be completely fine. I think this team isn't that great outside of him. They need some help in some other spots, but you have pick 3 and 16 in this year's draft, and Arizona is a place where you may not be able to bring all the elite high-end free agents, but you can still get a good amount of guys. So I think people would want to play with Kyler Murray, and if I was Marvin Harrison, I think that would be pretty intriguing too. Next up here, Washington. I know in the last mock draft, some of you guys said maybe they shouldn't go with edge, and, I'll listen here. It seems like they need some help on the edge, but as I just mentioned, I think they also need some help in the offensive tackle department, which is listed as the number 1 need right here. And that does make sense. I think they do need some help. They also need some help in the cornerback position, but drafting Emmanuel Forbes last year in the first round, I don't think they go with a cornerback here with the 4th overall pick. I will go with offensive line, and I think Olu Fashanu is the better offensive tackle, but I wouldn't be surprised if Washington is intrigued by the big frame of Joe Alt. I am going to give them Olu Fashanu just because I think he's better, but it just feels like one of those picks where if both guys are on the board, I don't know why. I just get this feeling that Washington may like a guy like Joe Alt at 6'7". They may like the upside of him. I think Olu has performed better on the field, but a guy like Joe Alt, like I keep saying, he's 6'7". That's something that is not easy to come by in the NFL, especially in the NFL right now. There's not very many guys. He's actually listed at 6'8", not even 6'7". So 6'8", a very big guy, 322. And Olu Fashanu is still 6'6". He's still a great guy. He's fast on his feet. He's great. He would have been a top 5, top 10 pick last year if he entered the draft. He decided to stay. And one of those instances where his draft stock isn't going to get hurt either way. I think if he went in the draft last year, he'd probably go around the same spot as he is this year. And next up here, we have the Bears, who got Caleb Williams with their first pick in the first round. So now what do you do? I think I'm still on the plan where you draft Caleb Williams and you want to protect him. I think you draft Joe Alt here. He's still available, and I don't see any reason why you wouldn't get him here. I think it would be perfect for this team, especially for Chicago, to be able to still have those assets that they have, obviously trading away the first overall pick last year, and they end up getting DJ Moore. You also have Caleb Williams to work with now, Joe Alt to protect him, and last year too, trading down and getting a tackle in the first round. So you're basically solidifying both of your tackle spots with a top 5 pick this year and a top 10 pick last year. So I would assume that that's good enough for them going into the future. Next up here, we have the Raiders with the 6th overall pick. And the Raiders in an interesting spot here. I think they're a decent team. They have some really good pieces offensively, in my opinion. Guys like Michael Mayer, Jacoby Myers, Devontae Adams still there, Josh Jacobs. They have some good pieces, but I just don't think they have a very good quarterback. And we're getting to the spot now where Jayden Daniels just won the Heisman. We know how good he's been, but there's still some question marks around him. Do I go with a guy like Jayden Daniels here, where some people may not even have him as the 3rd best quarterback, which I think you could definitely make an argument for. I mean, guys like Bo Nix and Michael Penix you may see as a little bit of a safer option. I know that might be a little bit of a hot take, but I think you could easily say that. In my opinion, it's really close between all these guys. I think Jayden Daniels could go here, but personally, I just haven't got to the point in the draft process where I would say he should go here. And I think the Raiders do need a little bit of help outside of that overall quarterback position. I think looking at who's left on the board here, they don't really need help with receiver. Tight end, you could use help, but you just drafted Michael Mayer last year. I think he's good enough where you don't really take a risk. I don't think essentially it's a risk. I think Brock Bowers is one of the best players in this class, but I just don't think you need to draft Michael Mayer last year and get Brock Bowers this year. I think I might have convinced myself with them to go with Jayden Daniels here. They didn't draft Will Levis last year, so maybe they invest with quarterback here. If we look at our options, Jayden Daniels, Michael Penix, Bo Nix, J.J. McCarthy. I wouldn't be surprised if J.J. McCarthy goes back to school if he doesn't get the job done this year. That might be a little bit of a hot take, but I think he could benefit from that. I'm going to go with Jayden Daniels here. The first time that I'm actually putting another quarterback in the top 10 outside of Drake May and Caleb Williams. They're not leaving the top 2. I mean, they could leave the top 2, maybe end up with the top 3, depending on who gets that 2nd overall pick. But besides those 2 guys, I've been hesitant to pick quarterback outside of those 2 in the top 3. And I think I've convinced myself Jayden Daniels. Do I think he's good enough to go at the 6th spot? Yes and no. Do I think the Raiders would be a team that would take a risk on a guy like Jayden Daniels? Yes, I think the Raiders will. I think they're fine with that. I think Jimmy Garoppolo hasn't been that great. I've never been a big fan of him. I've never really thought he's that great of a quarterback in general. I think he's been good enough, especially in that 49ers system. Now we see Brock Purdy in that 49ers system playing better than Jimmy Garoppolo ever was. So maybe Jimmy Garoppolo just isn't the answer wherever he goes. He's getting older by the year. Maybe it's time to invest. But also, you have a spot here where if Jayden Daniels doesn't play day 1, Jimmy Garoppolo can still be a serviceable quarterback until Jayden Daniels plays. Jimmy Garoppolo could even play his full year this year, get off of the contract, and then have Jayden Daniels start. So I think a perfect scenario for them there. Even if you go with a guy like Bo Nix or Michael Penix, I think you can still fit in that option pretty good. The Raiders are in a spot where they have a quarterback that's good enough that can play until they put the rookie in when they feel like it's time. And enough about the Raiders and Jayden Daniels. Let's move on to the Jets here. We're only on the 7th pick, and the Jets need some help too on the offensive line. When we look at other guys here, though, like J.C. Latham, like Amarius Mims, like Fuaga, like Graham Barton, I think besides that, I know there's some people pretty high on Troy Fautanu, Patrick Paul. I don't know in this 7 spot necessarily if I would feel like any of them would be deserving of it here. This is an interesting spot where there's a lot of different options left on the board. When we look at some of the best players, Malik Neighbors, Brock Bowers, Dallas Turner, all of these players could definitely be in the running for the Jets here. The Jets have a few different needs. They do need some help on the offensive line. I just don't know if they're willing to maybe take a little bit of a risk here with a guy like Amarius Mims in the 7 spot. I think he's good enough to, but obviously those injuries that he's had, especially this season, may give you some concerns. But if I'm the Jets, I think at this point you're willing to maybe take a risk on a offensive tackle just because you need help. You don't want to see Aaron Rodgers, who I would assume is your quarterback next year, get hurt again. And I am going to take him. I currently, actually, you know what? We'll go with J.C. Latham. I have J.C. Latham still above Amarius Mims in my overall big board. So we're going to go with my better offensive tackle there. With the 8th spot here, the Giants, they're in another very interesting scenario. All these games tonight that we just witnessed on Monday Night Football make this overall draft process a little bit harder to deal with because the Giants here have a few different options they could go with. Their team needs, according to this, are quarterback, offensive tackle, running back, and tight end. I don't know if they really go with any of those options here. Quarterback, with Jayden Daniels just going off the board, do you take Michael Penix or Bo Nix with the 8th overall pick? The way that Tommy DeVito has been playing, I'm not saying he's the quarterback going forward, but I don't think you're in desperate need of a quarterback with the 8th overall pick. I think instead you do need some help with that wide receiver position. I'm going to go with Malik Neighbors. He's dropped here. I think he's arguably the best receiver in the class. Pretty much every time I do these mock drafts every week, I've been giving you guys the Rome Odunze propaganda. I think he could be the second best receiver in this class. But for now, before we get into the official draft process, this is just before the season. And once we get into February, once we be able to see these guys running 40 times and stuff like that, and once we get an actual set overall draft order, things might change. But for now, I think Neighbors has solidified himself as the number 1. Next up here, Tennessee. Tennessee has a few different needs offensively and defensively here. When we look at this Tennessee team who just won against the Dolphins, no thanks to the Dolphins, losing pretty much by themselves, could have got out of bounds, could have got that first down, but I don't know what was happening at the end of the game for them. So what does Tennessee go with? They don't necessarily, I wouldn't say they need a quarterback. I think Will Levis could be their guy, or at least for now be their guy. I don't think they're going to invest in a quarterback here. And I think with this team overall, they do need some wide receiver help, and you may feel like you could go with one of those guys here. Tennessee does need some help defensively too. I think they do have pretty decent edge rushers, but Dallas Turner, I just think, is too good to slip past this 9 overall pick. And I know some Tennessee fans may not love that pick. They may look at their roster and say, maybe we don't necessarily need edge. But this is one of those instances where I just don't really see a reason to let a guy like Dallas Turner, who has become one of the best defensive, if not the best defensive player in college football right now, slip past that 9 pick. And edge is one of those positions where even if you have the best edge rushers in the NFL, another one will never hurt you. Next up here, we have the Chargers with the 10th overall pick. I think this is the spot where they need cornerback. I think the 10th overall pick, we can feel pretty comfortable drafting a cornerback here. And I'm going to continue to stick with my guy here. I know that they probably still have Kool-Aid McKinstry above him, but I do believe that Cooper DeJean is the best overall defensive back in this draft. Maybe not the best cornerback specifically compared to a guy like Kool-Aid McKinstry, but for a team like Los Angeles, they could use a crafty guy like Cooper DeJean who can run back kicks, a punt returner. He can do pretty much everything you need him to do. I'm still going to push Cooper DeJean as being the best defensive back in this draft. Next up here, the Falcons. The Falcons were in another spot where another quarterback could go. They saw a quarterback go off the board before, and depending on who you ask, some people may believe that Desmond Ridder could be the answer, maybe not completely for the future, but at least for now. I don't think Desmond Ridder is really that great. I don't think he's as terrible as some people might say. Do I think they go with a guy like Michael Penix or Bo Nix here? No, I think they kind of lean away from that. They do need some help in a bunch of different places. You could go with cornerback here. I think for me right now, it's either between a cornerback or potentially even Jer'Zhan Newton here. I think defensively they could go with. Also, the receiver room could use a little bit of a boost right now. Atlanta, not looking the best overall, but throughout the past few years, we have seen this team draft, and especially in that tight end position when they drafted Kyle Pitts. They've drafted Kyle Pitts, and he hasn't really done that much. I also think they just haven't really given him as many chances as he deserves to at this point. I mean, he is one of the best tight ends that we've seen in the draft process in a long time, and he just didn't really get it done. I think, though, looking at this roster and the receivers that they have, they got Drake London. I think you can wait for quarterback, maybe even get a guy in the second round. You have Drake London, Mac Hollins, and Van Jefferson as your 3 starting receivers. I think a guy like Keon Coleman, a bigger guy, would fit in perfectly there for them. Keon Coleman at 6'4", a perfect frame to fit in there right next to a guy like Drake London. It would be perfect. You get Bijan in there too. Take a little bit of stress off the running game, which will also in turn let Bijan Robinson run the ball a little more freely. Next up here, we have the Saints with the 12th overall pick, and the Saints have been mediocre so far this year. They're in one of the worst divisions. I would say probably the worst division now in the NFL. So they're in this weird position where they're still in the running for a playoff spot, but they're also in the running for a top 10 spot. I think this one is pretty simple here. They need some help on that D-line. I think you could go with a guy like Johnny Newton, Jer'Zhan Newton here from Illinois, one of the best defensive players in this class and the best defensive lineman here. I think it fits perfectly. Next up here, Seattle. Seattle needs some help defensively. They need some help on that edge and the D-line overall. I think you've seen some guys fall. Jared Verse, Latu, Chop Robinson, all here. In my opinion, Jared Verse, the second best edge rusher in this class, right behind Dallas Turner. He could be a better pure edge rusher than Dallas Turner. Dallas Turner a bit more versatile. I think that's why he goes before Jared Verse. But I think that's also just because Dallas Turner has had more production this season. Jared Verse could be one of those guys that maybe didn't have as much production in college, but once he gets a good shot in the NFL, he could go out there and be one of the best edge rushers. Next up here, the Rams. The Rams do need a little bit of help in a few different places right now. This team has had some surprising rookies this year, including guys like Puka Nacua, and I think they go defense here. We're going to stick with the edge. I think it would be between an edge and a cornerback. Kool-Aid McKinstry, though. Actually, now that I'm looking, I don't think if you have an option between a guy like Latu and Kool-Aid McKinstry, it's very tough because both of those guys would tremendously help this defense. I think they just need a little bit more help on the edge, and I think that's probably their number one need. I guess it says it here too, but in my opinion, I think they need edge a little bit more than corner, which it is tough to see Kool-Aid McKinstry fall. It's just kind of how this draft has gone so far. I'm not necessarily saying that all these guys are better than him. I just think, with some of these mock drafts, that's just how it ends up going. I'm going to go with Latu here, kind of stay in the Los Angeles area. I think they would be fine with that pick. The Denver Broncos here, who are actually coming back within the past few weeks. Russell Wilson has been looking good. They need some help in the cornerback. I think if they were in this exact position in real life between Latu and Kool-Aid McKinstry, I think you would be perfectly happy taking whichever guy falls between both of these guys. They need help with the edge and the cornerback, so either happy with Latu or Kool-Aid falling. Kool-Aid falls, so they're going to take him here. Arizona's second pick here, and they need a little bit of help on the edge also. And Chop Robinson is here. You drafted Marvin Harrison before. This edge class is very good. They also could use some help in the cornerback position, so a guy like Nate Wiggins could help you out a lot. I think they're going to go with Chop Robinson here, though. They gave both of those picks for Arizona an A+, and I think if I was a Cardinals fan, I would be very happy with having Marvin Harrison and Chop Robinson on my team. Next up here, Buffalo. Buffalo's had a very weird season overall. They've been in and out of competition. Last week, they were very good, and The week before that, maybe not so good. That's kind of just been their season so far. Brock Bowers is a very interesting player here. I don't think he falls to 17, but in this scenario, there's just so many other needs for teams. It's really weird because I almost forgot that he was still on the board. But when you look at team needs, it's just hard to put a tight end on a team. I think Brock Bowers is arguably the best player in this draft. And I don't think Buffalo goes with a tight end here, which is tough. I don't think Brock Bowers falls past this point. But we're going to have to go with receiver here. Rome Odunze, the best receiver left in the class at this point. I think they got to go with him. And Cincinnati here, they need tight end. They're not going to let Brock Bowers slip. Easy pick for them. If Brock Bowers ends up falling to the 18th overall pick, I would be shocked. That would be one of the best draft day steals in NFL history, in my opinion. I think he's one of the best players in this class, and it's kind of hard to put a guy like him on a team. I think he's very good, but with the tight end need, some teams may be hesitant to draft him. I don't think he's going to fall to 18. It's just how this mock ended up working out. Next up here, Green Bay. Green Bay competing this year. I think Jordan Love is their quarterback of the future, so no quarterback in my opinion here. I think they are bummed that Brock Bowers went right before them. Do they go with a wide receiver, though? That's the question. They need help in the wide receiver room, but as we know, they're notorious for not drafting a wide receiver. Do they go with a guy like Braylon Trice? I don't know. I think the wide receiver pick would be the best here. I think that would fit the best for them. And I'm going to break the curse. I'm going to give them Emeka Egbuka. I convinced myself. I think you finally need to invest in a first-round receiver. Emeka Egbuka has dropped down some people's boards. Some people have forgot about him. He was arguably the second-best receiver going into this season. And being next to Marvin Harrison, one of the best wide receivers in college football, if not, I think the best. Some people may argue Malik Neighbors, but Marvin Harrison's going to take away some touches from you. Emeka Egbuka, though, would be very happy to go within the top 20, and I think he completely deserves it. Next up here, the Buccaneers. The Bucs, another team that could potentially go with a quarterback. They're in a spot where they picked up a guy in Baker Mayfield, and he's been good enough where you may question, do you go with a quarterback? That's also what I'm questioning here. You're in a spot, like I just said, where you may not necessarily need him right away. I think they're going to stick away from that. They're not going to draft a quarterback here. They need some help on that offensive line. I'm going to go with Amarius Mims here. I think they'd be happy with that pick. And personally, I think a 20 overall pick for Amarius Mims would be almost perfect. They have him at 20 here on their big board. I agree with that. I think he's right around my 20 spot as well. Next up, the Indianapolis Colts here at the 21st overall pick. I think they see Nate Wiggins on the board, a pretty easy pick in my opinion at cornerback. They could use a quarterback. I know that's said there as a team need, but I don't think they need a quarterback. I completely disagree with that. I don't know why that would be on the screen. Drafting Anthony Richardson last year, why would you draft a quarterback again? Even if Anthony Richardson doesn't play, which I think he will be completely fine from his injury, Gardner Minshew has been good enough. I don't understand why that's on the screen for them. But a team who could use a quarterback, I'm going to stick here with Michael Penix going to Minnesota. I think at this spot, Michael Penix could go to Minnesota with a 22nd overall pick. Kirk Cousins is, I don't know what his future is in the NFL. I don't know what his future is with the Vikings. I don't know if he's going to play. Hopefully he does and he comes back healthy, but I just think Michael Penix would be a great investment for them here. And the Steelers here, they need some help in the quarterback position. We've been in this position, the same exact spot last week with them. And I think they could use Terrion Arnold. Kalen King would be a very cool scenario for them. They could also use some help on that offensive line. I think they do stick with a cornerback, though. I think Terrion Arnold would be the pick, though. Obviously, Kalen King would be cool, drafting him and staying within Pennsylvania, also getting Joey Porter last year. The Houston Texans, who have definitely played past pretty much everyone's expectations, especially mine so far, C.J. Stroud has been one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, period. They need some help here, and they're going to go, in my opinion, they need some help in that wide receiver spot. I'm going to give them It is tough here. Looking between guys like A.D. Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, even guys like Johnny Wilson, it's kind of tough to see where these teams would go with. Personally, I'm going to give them... It is tough because I do want to give them a wide receiver. I do think that they need some help, though. Actually, we're going to bounce to the opposite side here. See, I'm going back and forth. This is kind of on the fly. I had some of the first picks up. I'm going to give them A.D. Mitchell. I think that would be a great catch point receiver for them. I think he would fit into this team perfectly with the ball placement from C.J. Stroud and A.D. Mitchell being one of the best high point receivers in the NFL right now. I think that would fit in perfectly for them. The Chiefs here also need some help in the wide receiver department. It is kind of tough, though, because you look at a guy like Xavier Worthy. Do you think the Chiefs draft a guy like Xavier Worthy? Maybe. I think there's definitely an argument there. You could compare him to a guy like Tyreek Hill, which I think by the time the draft comes around, I would be surprised if people don't have that same comparison. I think they like the speed from Xavier Worthy, probably going to run a 4.3, maybe even less, and they want to recreate that magic with Mahomes. Kadarius Toney, I would be very surprised if he's not released from the team after what is going on this whole season. He has messed up a lot of plays for them, so I think they're fine with him leaving the team. The Jaguars here, they don't necessarily need help on the edge. Braylon Trice is here, also JT Tuimoloau. They do not necessarily need some help in that offensive tackle department either. I think they need some help in that cornerback position, though. Kalen King, I think, would be a perfect fit here at the 26th overall pick for them. Detroit, who also needs a cornerback, may not like that coming off the board right before them. Does that stop them from getting a cornerback? Maybe. I think Kamari Lassiter could be in the equation, but also I think they do need some help on the offensive line. Talise Fuaga goes here with the 27th overall pick. The Eagles here, looking for a cornerback. They also would have liked Kalen King. I think that would have fit into their team pretty well right now. D-line, I don't think Leonard Taylor would be good enough to go with this 28th overall selection, though the Eagles, they're good enough where they can pretty much take anyone and not really have to worry about it too much. I don't think necessarily Braylon Trice would go here. I don't think they need edge. I think the best player available that they could go with would be Cameron Kinchens here, a very dynamic safety, and that would fit into their defense pretty well. I know he's not a Georgia player, so they may not take him. They may have to look for a Georgia player just to fit that mold. I wouldn't be surprised if they just took Kamari Lassiter just to keep the bid up, even though I think Kamari Lassiter is one of the best cornerbacks in this class. The Dolphins here with the 29th overall pick, they need some help on that offensive tackle. Graham Barton can help them and fill pretty much any position on the offensive line. He's played pretty much every position throughout his football career in general, so that would be good for them. And the Dallas Cowboys here also need some help on the offensive tackle end, and I think this is a moment where they could take a little bit of a reach here, in my opinion. I don't necessarily think any of these guys are I think some of these guys could be first-round material. I know there's a lot of people that like Troy Fautanu or Patrick Paul. I would say it's a little bit of a reach, in my opinion, but I am going to give them Jordan Morgan here, who is listed as the fourth best offensive tackle. I think he does have a little bit of an upside here, and he's a guy at 6'6", where Tyler got in near. I don't know what happened with that, but I think he's a guy where you wouldn't be too upset with that result for the Cowboys. And Tyler Gutton here goes to the 49ers. I did not mean to clip that, but I think they could use help on that offensive line. So I would give them Kingsley Sotomia here instead of Tyler Gutton. But there is some people that have Tyler Gutton within their maybe first or second round. So we would put him there. And Baltimore with the last pick in the first round. This is a team that has been great all year, and I don't think you let Braylon Trice fall past this spot here, and that will complete our first round, an A-plus pick for them. Looking at this draft overall, if we can pull this back up, we have Caleb Williams once again going in that first spot, Drake May, Marvin Harrison. I think the main thing to look at here, Jayden Daniels at 6. I don't think Brock Bowers falls to 18. I think he could easily go way higher than that. But the way that this draft went, it was kind of hard to put him up there. I think he will be able to get up there, though. I could see a team like the Chargers even drafting him with the 10th overall pick. That's kind of just how the mock fell this time. Michael Penix going 22nd overall. And overall, I think a lot of these teams would be happy, but there's still a lot of time left until the actual draft happens. So we will see a lot of things change from now until then. And from now until next week, we will see a lot of things change. So I will see you guys next week with a new mock draft. Let me know down below what you would change as well, and I'll see you then.